Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Ross. For any of you that don't know me, I'm the Interim Executive Director of the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, and I'd like to welcome you all to the first annual general meeting of NDRIO, 11593765 Canada Association, as it's formally named. By my count, it's about 6 months and 11 days since we all met in Ottawa at our first special members meeting. In many respects, that seems like yesterday, but in other respects, it seems like ages ago. And we're really pleased you could join us here today, all of you. Before we get things underway, I'd like to review some housekeeping items, if I may. First of all, we're working with Lumi Global to facilitate this meeting. Lumi is the company that helped us host our special members meeting last March, you may recall. If any of you that were there participated. And with their assistance, this meeting is being broadcast with simultaneous language translation. And you can select your language preference in the top left-hand side of the broadcast screen. So that's the top left-hand side of the broadcast screen for simultaneous translation. If you'd like to ask a question during any of our Q&A sessions, please use the chat feature. The chat feature can be found by clicking the messaging icon at the top middle of your Lumi screen. The chat will appear on the left-hand side of your screens if you do that. All supporting documents can be found in the Documents tab to the right of the messaging function. Now, my colleague Jay Black will be the technical moderator for us today. Questions sent via the chat feature can be asked in either English or French. Jay will translate as needed, supported by Madeleine Lemaire of our communications team. If you experience any technical issues, you can receive help by both the phone number and the email address that can be found in the Information tab represented by the letter I, found at the top of your Lumi screen to the left of your messaging icon. A reminder that the AGM is being recorded to all of you, and this will be housed on the NDRIO website after the event. It's been a tremendous year one for NDRIO, building this new organization from the ground up. We couldn't fulfill our mandate without the hard work and dedication of our leadership team, the stewardship and guidance of our board, collaboration of our ecosystem partners, support from our funder, ISED, and the strength of our membership. Thank you all very much. We have 181 participants with us today, 99 member organizations, including 43 primary member organizations are joining us here today, which is a great showing at this busy time of year for the community. I'd also like to say a special welcome to our board members, many of whom are with us today, and special guest speakers, Assistant Deputy Mr. Vats, Guillaume, Bourque, and Nizar Ladak, who will have time to speak later on in the event. And now I'd like to introduce Janet Davidson, Chair of NDRIO's Board of Directors, to say a few opening remarks. Janet, over to you.
As George mentioned, it's been just 6 months and 11 days since this board met for the first time. I was thinking of it this morning. It was 2 days pre-COVID, or the pre-COVID shutdown. So we've had a challenging 6 months, but a lot of hard work has been accomplished. But it's a pleasure today to have representatives from our primary and associate members, along with our special guests, board directors, and NDRIO staff. As George said, it's been an incredible first year of operations for the organization. NDRIO has been in existence for less than a year, and remarkable progress has been made. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge everyone's efforts and to thank you all for your dedication, hard work, and commitment that have helped us achieve many milestones. Obviously, there is still much work to do, but the work undertaken in our first year has laid the groundwork to achieve our goals. Building on the progress that we have made, we're focused on what lies ahead and opportunities for improvement. This work, of course, would not be possible without the vision and leadership in the National Digital Research Infrastructure Strategy from our funder, the Government of Canada, through Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. NDRIO has an ambitious mandate to transform how research data across all academic disciplines are organized, managed, stored, and used. The result will help our country's research community access and interpret data and information faster than ever before. The coordination and funding of activities in advanced research computing, data management, and research software will not only immensely benefit Canadian researchers, but researchers from around the world. We've heard from George, and soon we'll be joined by special guest speaker Nipun Vats. After the official business portion of our agenda, George will share with you an NDRIO update. Dr. Guillaume Bourque will then present the inaugural Researcher Council. Following that great news, we will welcome and introduce our next special guest speaker, NDRIO's incoming CEO, Nizar Ladak, who will take part in a fireside chat, virtual of course, with NDRIO Vice Chair Peter MacKinnon. We will wrap up the meeting no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. After the official business portion of our agenda, we look forward to sharing with you an NDRIO update, presenting the inaugural Researcher Council, introducing NDRIO's incoming CEO, engaging with you during a Q&A session. Collaboration and consultation with our membership and the research community is of the utmost importance to us. Your engagement matters and truly makes a difference. Please make your voices heard today or by reaching out to us at any time. I can't speak enough about how important this is to us. I'd now like to introduce to you special guest speaker Nipun Vats, who's Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Research Sector at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Nipun began his public service career at Natural Resources Canada. He held senior roles in the Privy Council Office and at Finance Canada before moving to ISED as Director General, Strategic Policy, where he led the federal negotiating team for the Canada Free Trade Agreement. He has been an Assistant Deputy Minister with ISED since 2017. But before his work in public service, he was a practicing scientist. Having completed his PhD in physics at the University of Toronto, he also holds a Master of Public Affairs from Princeton University. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Assistant Deputy Minister Vats.
Thank you very much, Janet. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at today's NDRIO annual general meeting. I'd like to start by sort of first acknowledging that Minister Bain sends his regrets and best wishes to all of you. This has been a fairly big priority for the department ever since Budget 2018, and so it's really great to see it come to fruition like this. So I just wanted to pass along his best wishes, and thank Janet and in particular George and his team for the hard work to get to this point, as well as to welcome Nizar as the incoming CEO, who's got a big job ahead of him, but has been set up well by the board and by the management team. I thought I'd just start by taking a bit of a step back and flagging that it's been 2 years sort of since the initiative was announced, and a year since NDRIO has been selected, as well as having awarded an expansion of funds to the 5 advanced research computing national host sites to ensure that there was continued growth in computing capacity in the country, as well as funding for the Carl Portage activities to bring the Federated Research Data Repository to production. So there are these 3 critical elements of the ecosystem that are now kind of coming together in a way to really have an integrated way of meeting the needs of the research community. I'd also sort of just like to flag, the reality that we've all been facing, and the reason that we're having this virtual meeting with respect to COVID-19. I think it's important to acknowledge that when everybody signed up for NDRIO, they couldn't have possibly anticipated this additional challenge, which has created an unanticipated uncertainty and change that they've had to manage quite adeptly, along with a very ambitious initiative, even in its own right. And I think it's important to acknowledge that Canadians have come together to respond to COVID-19. The research community has made a huge effort and has been an integral part of that response. And I think that the agility of Canada's research community to understand and respond to the various aspects of COVID-19 has been a critical element in getting us this far and will continue to be important. And within that, the DRI partners have played an important role, including CANARI, the Compute Canada Federation, and NDRIO, to respond in this very challenging and changing context. That at least that for the general public and even for the research community just casts an important spotlight on the importance of our digital tools. I think we already know this, but it is all the more salient when you're dealing with a situation like this. Even with the challenges that the pandemic has created, it is important to acknowledge the major progress that has happened through NDRIO in less than a year, including working to define a national vision that reflects the input of stakeholders and researchers who are at the center of this. There's been the first members meeting in March, as George alluded to, an inaugural board with a very strong slate of committed directors and leaders. The recent selection of the incoming CEO, and today, a very big step is also the announcing of the first Researchers Council, which is that connective tissue to the researchers themselves, which is absolutely critical, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think that it's also important to acknowledge that this has been a collaborative effort across the ecosystem. It requires a fair bit of transformation in how these services have been delivered, and NDRIO's efforts in advancing progress, it should be applauded. It's had a very important role to play in transition planning, defining the national vision and services with respect to computing, data management, and software. And it's also worked very closely with the other key players in the ecosystem, like CANARI and the Compute Canada Federation, to ensure a smooth transition for researchers, as well as for all the people who really make the system run. The highly qualified personnel who make this their job, but also their vocation, is a critical part of the puzzle, and making sure that they've transitioned to this new world effectively is absolutely critical to making this work. It's also been important to recognize the importance of cybersecurity in all of this, which has become all the more important within COVID-19 and has been an additional element that has been built into the NDRIO's DNA. So I think I just want to congratulate you on how far you've come, and look forward to seeing you move forward to even greater things as we advance this initiative. I just wanted to make a quick mention of the Researcher Council. As I mentioned, the researcher is central to all of this. Obviously, it's the core of this whole initiative, and it's a major milestone that the Researcher Council will be named today, and their work is critical to helping ensure that the strategic directions of NDRIO are researcher-centric and respond to the researcher needs. It's a way to make sure that there's broad representation of researchers across Canada, and that their voices are actually reflected in the vision in an objective, sort of integrated way to make sure that the system is supporting the needs of researchers. And I think that that perspective that will be brought to bear will strongly benefit the whole DRI ecosystem and ultimately Canadians, and how this kind of make sure that this investment really realizes its benefits. So just in closing, whether it's cybersecurity, the transition, strategic visioning for the future, I just want you to know that you have ISED and the government's full support in achieving the goals of the strategy. There have been a lot of unforeseen challenges over this year, but you've made some great progress towards implementing these goals. And I just want to congratulate you on your work to date. And I look forward to working with you in the future, as do my team and the rest of ISED. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Assistant Deputy Minister Vats. We very much appreciate your time and your participation today. Because of the pandemic, NDRIO and the DRI community have faced uncertainty during this unprecedented time. It's inspiring, as you noted, that Canadians have indeed come together to support our country's response to COVID-19, especially our researchers from coast to coast who are helping find solutions to this global crisis. It's a privilege to support Canadian researchers and the implementation of the National DRI strategy. Our thanks to ISED for its ongoing support and leadership. So the meeting will now officially come to order, and it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues on the board of directors of the corporation who are in attendance today. Just to advise you that there are a couple of members today who cannot join us. Chris Lum, here is the list here, but Chris Lum is unfortunately not able to be with us, nor is Alexandra King, nor David Barnard and Deb Verhoeven. But I'm pleased to welcome the other board members. I'd also say it's my equal pleasure to introduce the officers of the corporation who are present, and that's George Ross, who's the interim executive director, Norman Rees, who's the interim CFO, and Alison Barr, who's the director of policy, governance, and membership. We also have a number of members of our leadership team at NDRIO who are present today. Ghislaine Roquette, who's director of planning and operations, Jay Black, who's the strategic advisor, Cynthia Goodwin, our communications lead, Mark Haley, the HR lead, and Elizabeth Carter, who's the senior executive assistant. Now, pursuant to the corporation's bylaws, this meeting is being conducted entirely by electronic means using the Lumi meeting platform, as George mentioned earlier. But before we begin the formal business of the meeting, I'd just like to provide a brief overview of the Lumi meeting platform that we'll be using to facilitate today's meeting. During the meeting, I'll refer to motions that are to be voted upon by the primary members. Only one representative from each primary member organization may vote. I will then ask for a motion and a seconder to be moved and seconded through the Lumi chat function. We will then have time for discussion on the motion requiring discussion. And if there is discussion, I invite you to pose your question or comment again in the chat feature. Voting on the motions will be conducted through the Lumi platform, but to facilitate the orderly meeting, we will defer votes on all the motions until they've all been moved and seconded. Please note that only primary representatives of primary members who are entitled to vote at this meeting are entitled to move, second, or vote on a motion. So just say again, only primary representatives of primary members who are entitled to vote at this meeting are entitled to move, second, or vote on a motion. If a primary member organization does not have a primary representative in attendance, their secondary representative or a pre-authorized alternate will be able to vote. For transparency, all attendees will be able to see the motions and voting results, but only voting representatives will be able to submit votes. For voting members, just a reminder, once you click vote in the platform, the vote is received. If there are any questions, I would ask that you put them now through the chat function so we can respond to them. Okay, well, not seeing any questions, we will continue with the meeting. So pursuant to the corporation's bylaws, I will act as chair of the meeting. Alison Barr will act as recording secretary with the consent of the meeting. I will appoint Julie Robinson of MacKinnon Cooper as the scrutineer. The notice calling this meeting was sent on September 3rd, 2020 to all the members of record as of September 2nd, 2020. The scrutineer has prepared a report on attendance at the meeting. I'll just, I've got it, thank you. And I'll just read it to you. In my capacity as scrutineer for the annual meeting of the members of 11593-765 Canada Association, either corporation, held on September 24th, 2020, I report that there are 42 Class A primary members who are entitled to vote at the meeting and present online or voting by mailed-in ballot, representing 85.7% of the 49 primary members of the corporation as of the record date. So pursuant to the bylaws of the corporation, I'm satisfied then that we have a quorum of members present. Notice having been served in accordance with the bylaws and a quorum being present, I declare that this meeting is duly constituted for the transaction of business. However, I would ask the scrutineer to submit a final report on attendance as soon as it is available, and she's actually already done that, so we're okay. We have 4 items of business to complete as part of the formal meeting. Approval of the minutes for the special meeting of the members of the corporation held on March 11th, 2020. Presentation of the audited financial statements of the corporation for the year ended March 31st, 2020. Appointment of the corporation's auditor for the financial year ended March 31st, 2021. Confirmation of the amended and restated general operating bylaws of the corporation. And then, of course, transaction of any other business that may properly come before the meeting. As I mentioned to you earlier, what we will be doing is taking each item separately, but having a mover and seconder, and then any discussion that's relevant to those particular items. But at the end, we will call for a vote. I will call for a vote on all of the items. So the first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the special meeting of the members held on March 11th, 2020. Unless there's an objection, I will dispense with the reading of the special meeting minutes. Okay, hearing no objection to that, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes for the special meeting of the members of the corporation held on March 11th, 2020. I so therefore invite a primary member representative to make the motion by typing "I make the motion" in the Lumi chat. So a motion has been made representing the Rotman Research Institute, Baycrest. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Just waiting. Yes, we have a seconder, Scott Dellinger, University of Alberta. So we have, the motion has been duly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Or any questions, comments? If you do have them, please use the chat function at this time. Okay, receiving no comments then. As I mentioned earlier, to be efficient, we'll vote on the 3 motions at the same time at the end of the discussion on all of them. But we'll now move on to the next item of business. This is the presentation of the corporation's annual financial statements and the auditor's report for the year ended March 31st, 2020. Copies of this, as a reminder, were provided to the members. The annual financial statements and auditor's report can be found on your screen under the Information tab at the top left-hand side of your screen. I'd now like to invite Norman Rees, who's the corporation's Chief Financial Officer, to provide an overview of the statements. Norm.
Thank you, Janet. As Janet mentioned, the audited statements were included in the AGM package that were sent to members and posted on the NDRIO's website. The audited financial statements include the following: the independent auditor's report issued by KPMG, the financial statements, the statements of financial position, statement of operations and changes in net assets, and the statement of cash flows, and finally the notes to the statements. I'm going to make a few comments on these statements. First, KPMG's audit opinion stated that the financial statements present fairly in all material aspects the financial position, results of operations, and the cash flows of NDRIO as at March 31st, 2020, in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. That's a mouthful, but it means we had a clean opinion. Now some comments on the financial statements, specifically the statement of operations and the statement of financial position. On your screen is the statement of operations. During fiscal year 2019-20, ISED funded NDRIO $2,135,500. Of that amount, NDRIO spent and recorded as revenue $1,494,291. Expenses related to the startup of its operations included interim staff, board and board recruitment, travel related to stakeholder consultations, and organization commissioning. NDRIO also generated $10,160 of interest income on bank balances, and the excess of revenue over expenses equaled the interest income earned. Have the next slide, please. This is a statement of financial position, sometimes called a balance sheet, which shows the statement of assets and liabilities of NDRIO. Assets amounted to $962,748, of which $841,229 was cash. Liabilities were also $962,748, included accounts payable of around $311,000 and deferred funding of $641,209. The deferred funding represents the unspent ISED funds as at March 31st, 2020. This is the funding ISED provided, less the expenses that were incurred. These unspent funds were approved by ISED for carryover into 2021, so we were able to use those funds this year. Finally, the notes to the financial statements. These notes provide additional information or context for the financial statements and are a combination of required and discretionary disclosure. One interesting note is that new this year is note 5, which speaks to COVID-19 and its impact on the financial health of the organization. This has become a standard note in all financial statements, and given the ultimate duration and magnitude of the pandemic, the impact on NDRIO is unknown at this time, and an estimate of the impact was impractical as at March 31st, 2020. These are my comments on the financial statements, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Norm. If anybody has any questions, again, I would invite you to submit those through the chat function. Well, we haven't received any, so I'll move on to the third item of business, which is the appointment of the corporation's auditor until the next annual meeting of members or until a successor is appointed, and to authorize the board of directors to fix the auditor's remuneration. KPMG LLP was selected by the corporation's auditor. The board recommends that KPMG be reappointed as auditor for the forthcoming year. I will entertain a motion to reappoint KPMG as the corporation's auditor until the next annual meeting of members or until a successor is appointed, and to authorize the board of directors to fix the auditor's remuneration. So I would invite a primary member representative to make the motion by typing "I make the motion" in the Lumi chat function. So we have a mover, Sandra Crocker, Carleton University. I would now ask for a seconder for that motion. Allison Sekuler, Rotman Research Institute, Baycrest, has seconded that motion. Is there any further discussion on this motion? If there is, certainly submit it through the chat feature. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item of business and return to vote on this and the other motions at the end of the, during the designated voting period. The fourth item of business is to ratify and confirm the amended and restated general operating bylaws of the corporation adopted by the board of directors of the corporation on August 31st, 2020. The amendments were adopted based on feedback received from members, as well as ongoing review by the board of directors. In response to our call for input, feedback from the Institute of Particle Physics and Compute Ontario was also incorporated, and the changes to the bylaws reflect their contributions. A summary of the amendments and a comparison showing the changes to the bylaws were circulated with the notice of this meeting and are also posted to the NDRIO website. So I will now entertain a motion to ratify and confirm the amended and restated general operating bylaws of the corporation as circulated. Once we've had a mover and seconder, we can certainly discuss it through the chat function. So I would invite a primary member representative to make the motion by typing "I make the motion" in the Lumi chat. So Scott Dellinger, University of Alberta, has moved the motion. Can I have a seconder for that? We have a seconder, Jacques Corbet, University Laval. So this motion has been duly moved and seconded. Are there any questions, discussion, comments on this motion? And again, I would invite anyone who wishes to contribute to use the Lumi chat function. Well, receiving no no feedback at this point. I would now like to move to vote on the three motions that were previously moved and seconded. So the first motion that we're asking for a vote on is the motion to approve the minutes for the special meeting of the members of the corporation held on March 11th, 2020. Can put that on hold for a second. We have had some feedback on the bylaws, and it was noted by Judith Chadwick at U of T that there is no definition of independent included in the bylaws.
Hi there, this is Julie Robinson. I'm legal counsel to NDRIO. The reason for leaving out the definition of independent is because there is definitions of independent required by the contribution agreement, as well as external definitions of independence. So the board of directors felt it was prudent to keep flexibility in order to maintain flexibility in view of the requirements of that contribution agreement as it may change from time to time. The board would set its own independence criteria, both in view of the contribution agreement requirements as well as governance good practices.
Any other? Okay, so we will move back to the motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting of the members of the corporation, which was held on March 11th, 2020. Oh. Okay. We're going to go back to the question that was asked about the independent, and there's been a request from HPQC Labs. If you could just repeat your comments a bit more slowly.
Certainly. That is a problem that I have of speaking a bit too quickly. So the response was regarding inclusion of a definition of independence for board of directors members in the bylaws. The board of directors felt it was prudent to not include a definition, given that there are a number of definitions, including requirements of the contribution agreement to maintain independence, as well as good governance reasons to have independence, where those definitions may not be consistent. It will be important for the board of directors to maintain flexibility on determining what is independent and setting those criteria on their own.
All right, my apologies. I understand that all three votes are open. So there is the first, which is the approval of the minutes of the special meeting held on March 11th, 2020. The appointment of the corporation's auditor for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2021, and confirmation of the amended and restated general operating bylaws of the corporation. So the votes are open on all three. So I've received the report from the scrutineer, which confirms that all motions were approved by a majority of the votes cast. So I declare all motions carried. The voting results will be displayed through Lumi. In looking at the chat function, I know there's some questions that have been asked, and hopefully those questions have been responded to. Individuals who are receiving error messages are not entitled to vote, which is why the error message has come through. So you can see the results of the votes on the through the function. So with that, I can say the formal items of business as set out in the notice of meeting have now been dealt with, but I would ask, is there any further business? So as there is no further business, I will now call for a motion to conclude the formal portion of this meeting. So I would invite a primary member representative to make the motion by typing "I make the motion" in the Lumi chat function. So we've had a motion by Pamela Horanek from Athabasca University has moved this motion. I'll now call for a seconder. It's been seconded by Christina Orwell, McGill University. So the motion has been duly moved and seconded. There's no discussion on this item, so I'll just call for the vote. Again, it's in the box to the right of the chat function. So the vote is concluded. We'll pause briefly while the votes are tabulated. Okay, I've received a vote from the scrutineer, which confirms that a majority of the votes were in favor of the motion. So this formal portion of the meeting is now concluded. And I would now turn the meeting back over to George Ross. George.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's good. That portion of the meeting was over with. What I want to do right now is provide a bit of an update on the activities of NDRIO. We've been working on building NDRIO in earnest for about a year now. It was late last summer, when we came together with the applicant board to begin the build of NDRIO. And there's been a lot accomplished over that period of time, as others have mentioned. But it's fair to say that we're at a key point of departure in the growth of NDRIO. So what I would like to do today over the next few minutes is take stock of where we are, talk a little bit about our accomplishments, in particular since our last meeting in March, and talk a little bit about the future, what's on the horizon for the organization. So if you bear with me, I'm going to work through some slides here. For some members who are at recent member updates, some of these may be somewhat repetitive, but I will go through them again. Questions can be asked, I guess, through the chat function again. And I'll try to conclude this in time so we have 15 minutes towards the end for any kind of questions and discussion. I would also say that, there's a lot of material here, and you may feel more inclined to ask questions later on. We will have this material posted on the NDRIO website, and we can always take questions and get into discussion, through email exchange, et cetera, later on. So this is not certainly not the last opportunity to chat with us about what we've been up to and what the future plans are. So let's move on a couple slides, please, if you don't mind. Next one. Yeah. So when we think about the growth of NDRIO, we need to really think about some phases of its build out here. And there was a long gestation period. The vision that culminated in the budget commitment from the federal government in 2018. There was a lot of work that went into that. A lot of vision and thought went into it. But really, we've started work here in building the organization formally. As I said, since August of last year, our contribution agreement was initially signed in October, and we filed our first inaugural corporate plan in January of this year, early this year. So we've moved through the concept phase here, and I think the concept of NDRIO, what we're trying to achieve through the vision of NDRIO, is well understood. We are firmly in the build-out phase of this, and as we get into next year, we're going to rapidly be moving into the phase of operationalizing it and transition to new models, and ultimately, with the emergence of a strategic plan and a suite of programs that NDRIO will be running, we'll be moving into a stable operating mandate, corporate mandate. So I like to restate this this slide frequently because it's very critical that we think of this growth as an evolution. Having said that, this is going to be a rapid evolution. A lot of activity will be happening over the next year and a half as we build new models and new programs. Next slide, please. So again, this is a restatement of some things that members have seen before, but it's important to remember this. We have some critical transition dates. These are hard dates that we're working towards, including the April 1st, 2022 date when funding from the ARC expansion agreements and the major science initiatives cease, and where the full responsibility for data management and research software activities that are now housed in Canary are transitioned to NDRIO. So there is a hard transition point that we always keep in focus as we're working through our activities in NDRIO. Next slide, please. So we have a number of deliverables here. Some of them are in the realm of reporting and accountability deliverables that we're obliged to through our contribution agreement. We take those seriously. There's also a number of deliverables that we have set in our planning activities to build our strategy, to ultimately get to a multi-year funding proposal to the government, and to enable transition through transition plans. So what we've done here is just listed some of those key deliverables here. I'll just note a couple here that are of some importance here. We'll talk about this a little bit later. Coming up shortly here, we are targeting some draft current state assessment reports in October next month. We're targeting having an outline for some initial projects. We've been given the luxury of being able to make some investments, core investments in programming next year. And in October, we're targeting rolling out the framework for those. Those will be through open call and through transparent processes. So there'll be some initial projects upcoming here. We'll talk a little bit later about our brand new, freshly minted researcher council. That body of work that council will be taking on as a first priority will be a needs assessment, which is going to be important for members to hear about and to engage in as it's going forward. And ultimately, a year from now, we'll be delivering a strategic plan. NDRIO will be delivering a strategic plan for the whole DRI ecosystem, its responsibility in the DRI ecosystem. So, series of deliverables here that we are mindful of, and we have activities to meet those deliverables. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments. It's a good opportunity for us to take stock and to recite some of our accomplishments to you, our members, and to make sure you're clear on what we have achieved over the last several months. So let's move on, please. So again, I think a recent update of members, I talked a little bit about how we've approached the work, the strategic work of the organization. We've set ourselves up through a work plan that has six streams of activities here, and it's everything from stabilizing our governance to right through to transition planning and strategic planning. So we have a framework, we have a work plan framework that guides all of our work and organizes us in how we're targeting meeting those deliverables and ultimately delivering on the vision of NDRIO April 1st, 2022. And many of you will have seen that framework before, that architecture. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about governance here. If we could move on. So what I would say to you in terms of our governance of NDRIO here is we have a very, very solid governance foundation. We have our bylaws have now have gone through one set of housekeeping amendments and are quite stable. We have 136 members were recruited in January, February 2020. We'll talk a little bit about updated numbers there. Our board of directors are in place. And since March, we've had 7 board meetings, 3 quarterly meetings, and 4 special meetings. I'm not sure how you get 3 quarterly meetings in 6 months, but anyway, that's us on an accelerated timeline, I guess. I'm not sure how that happened, but we've had 3 regular meetings and 4 special meetings. We've had initial board orientation, and we have a planned governance training activity going forward for the organization. Our committees are set. We have HR, Audit, Finance, and Risk Committee, and Governance and Nominating Committee. And the board has also established 2 special committees, one focused on membership and stakeholder relations, and the other one is a joint NDRIO Compute Canada Transition Committee. So our committees are set. We've got a number of board level policies that are either set or in development. So my message to you is in a very short order here, thanks to the leadership of Janet and our board, the governance foundation of the organization is quite stable for a young organization like this. Next slide. Yeah, in the absence of having a fully formed strategic plan for NDRIO, where the mission and vision and values of the organization are articulated, we have been operating with some interim guiding principles for the organization. And these are really touch points for us as we're developing our plans and doing our work. And you know, we have worked very hard as an interim team to be collaborative and to make sure that we're open and transparent to our partners that we're working with. We have a service orientation in mind as we're doing our work here. We're acutely aware of the service nature of NDRIO, and also we continue to remind ourselves that ultimately what NDRIO is a researcher-centric organization, and it is there to serve the needs of Canada's academic research community. So we have some guiding principles here that have been used on an interim basis, and those will evolve as as our new CEO leads the organization through strategic planning, and the board articulates vision and values of the organization. Next slide. Accountability and reporting here. We've met all of our major milestones in terms of delivering our accountability reports to our funder. We have, as our CFO has mentioned, we've had a clean audit report. I guess of note on this slide here, I would just reiterate that, you know, there was a number of unavoidable delays and issues that were compromising our ability to meet some of our initial timelines that were articulated in our contribution agreement. We've successfully renegotiated some of those timelines with strong support from ISED. So we now have a set of deadlines ahead of us here that are quite doable in our view. So we've really achieved all of our accountability and reporting requirements here, and we're into a rhythm around that. Understand our funders' expectations in that regard. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit next around our development of our organization, and if we could move on, please. So, you know, we've been led here. We have led all of this activity with an interim team that has been established and has been growing since last fall. And today, I think when we count the number of people that are involved through various relationships with us, we're about 19 people. We have a very good stable of research analysts now that have joined the organization to support some of our planning activities. We have some senior human resources capacity. Finance administration team is working very well, and we have a good communications and member relations function in the organization as well. Of some pride to us is this team is really distributed from coast to coast, and we do work in both official languages. We also have augmented our team through the support of professional services, legal support. We've used recruitment support, payroll and compensation policy support, and some strategic planning support with plan development support as well. And most recently, over the summertime here, we dedicated a team to the work of the research advisory group you'll hear about later, which has resulted in the recruitment and establishment of our inaugural researcher council. So we dedicated some staff to that, led by Alison Barr, an intense period of work over the summertime. We have key organizational policies in place, beginnings of our HR policy. We've got procurement approaches, delegations in place, and we've done a considerable amount of work to ensure that the foundation for our new CEO is solid, and we have a transition plan and an onboarding approach established for Nizar as he's incoming. Very important for all of us here that the work we were doing would be helping and aiding him in building his vision around the organization, and that it's a body of work that he can build on. Moving on, please. So let's talk a little bit about our strategic planning foundations. This is the critical element of what we're really focused on here. We have and this is consistent with the earlier architecture, work plan architecture I was talking about here. We have a strategic planning framework that we're using, and it really ties together all of the major work streams. And you can see down the side here the major activities and the deliverables are arrayed, and also across the top those work plan streams and how we're mapping against those. So we do have a strategic planning framework that ultimately will result in a strategic plan being articulated for the organization in September a year from now. So I won't go through this in detail here, but this will be, as I said, posted. And if anybody has any questions around how we're approaching this, the various elements, I'm happy to have that discussion as a follow-up. Next slide. So within that framework, there's three areas that I want to drill down on, and I want to signal for members the importance of these streams of activity and the need for us in NDRIO and for you as members to engage in these activities. And the first one I'll talk a little bit about here is what we're calling our current state assessment. So the delivery of any new funding or service model for this organization has to be built on a critical understanding of the DRI landscape that's in Canada right now. And that work is underway right now. We will be documenting the current activities in the ARC, research data management, research software space, and we've substantially completed an assessment of the funding, the national funding scene, and also the deployment of the HQP, the staff that are working in this area right now. So coming out of this current state assessment, which we're targeting having some draft material ready to go for consultation at the end of this month, will be some position papers, and these will be subject to review and validation by the community here, and also a funding and staffing analysis where the FTEs are in the across the country right now. So as I said, we've got some of this work coming together in the next week. Some more of that will tail on into October and later into the fall. But there'll be some products coming out of this, some position papers, and some analysis that will be out for consultation and review and validation. So current state assessment, the key work stream for us. Next slide, please. The next portion of our critical work, and this will be built on the current state assessment I've been talking about, is a researcher needs assessment. So this activity will be led by our new researcher council. And our needs assessment is really be a process to identify the gaps between the current state and the desired state as defined by the research users. And that's really to elucidate on where the gaps in capacity are, and also what the emerging trends in research are, and how to use new technologies to bridge some of those gaps. We're talking about establishing a bit of a roadmap here, a critical path to move from the current state to the future state as a result of this needs assessment. So, this, as I said, will be led by the Researcher Council. This will be priority work for them, supported by a strong team of analysts, and it'll be informed by working groups and consultation, and the researcher needs assessment report will emerge out of that. So this work is being targeted for the end of this calendar year, December 31st, and it'll be a major input to the new service delivery model. Next slide, please. So this work is being led by Guillaume, and she is, through an open recruitment process, has recruited 4 senior analysts that are supporting this: Shahira, Felipe Seppo, and Chung. And they'll be deeply engaged with the Researcher Council, and you'll see a lot of them. Some of your colleagues will be working with them through working groups and through review processes going forward. And on that note, next slide, please. Yeah, we're very committed to making sure that all of this work that I've been talking about, the needs assessment, the current state assessment, goes through extensive outreach and validation. So we will be developing papers coming out of this. There'll be focus groups, working groups, and surveys and one-on-one meetings. So, watch for this in the next little while. There'll be lots of activity on this, led by Guillaume and her team. And of course, all of this work will be reviewed and validated by experts, and will be handled carefully by our Researcher Council. Next slide. Right, so the other thing I just want to bring everybody's attention to here is really probably the most critical piece of what we're going to be working on, and that is the rolling up of all of this analysis and needs assessment work into a new service and funding model. for the country here. And we will have that service model informed by international comparators, some benchmarking. We'll use it as a key input into our strategic plan and our multi-year funding proposal once it gets finalized. It'll articulate the national, regional, and institutional services, the layers, what's in those, what the expectations are of those various layers and how they will be funded, and what the contribution expectations are of matching funds within that. What we have been planning to do here is to secure some external professional services to support that work and the modeling that goes along with it, the option analysis, and the engagement with the community. And we are right now targeting a release of an RFP and that subject to direction from the new CEO sometime next month. And again, this there'll be a significant amount of work with working groups, steering committees, and consultations here. So this is really the big product that we'll be focusing on in the spring of 2021 next year. So current state assessment, needs assessment, and the new service model development are key underpinnings of the strategic plan. They fit together. They support each other in terms of planning processes, supported by engagement, validation, and ultimate inputs to our strategic plan for NDRIO and our multi-year funding request. Next slide, please. So, once we have that vision around how we're going to deliver programs and how they're going to be funded, we really have to move into a transition phase. In earnest, the planning for that will be commencing simultaneous to some of those other activities, but we will move into a phase of transition and operationalizing those new models. If we can move on to the next slide. Some of you will have seen these dates before. We have some transition plan deliverables. First one is the research data management research software transition plan will be led by Canary. It's being targeted for the end of January 2021 to be delivered. And Andrea will be responsible for leading the transition plan for ARC activities. We'll be doing that obviously in collaboration with the Compute Canada Federation and Compute Canada. And the deadline for that plan will be April 2021 now. Mentioned earlier in these slides, NDRIO and Compute Canada boards have agreed to setting up a joint transition governance committee to tie the two organizations together, the governance level to monitor the transition work and to make sure that that work is done in a seamless fashion and to make sure that the Compute Canada Federation's aspirations and role in all of this are clearly articulated and managed properly. Next slide. So you may have seen this this kind of a framework. We use these frameworks to keep track of our activities here again. So this is the one that's it's been initially put together to support our transition planning. Again, I won't go through this in detail, but this might be the basis of some further discussion. Going forward here, and again, happy to take questions on any of these elements, either in the meeting here or subsequent to the meeting. Let's move on, please. I'm cognizant of my time here. A little bit on how active we've been with the member and community base here. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of update on membership. So inaugural member recruitment drive. We approached 315 organizations. March 31st, we had 136 members. Today, we have 142 members, 49 primary and 93 associate members. So we're growing. Our membership is growing here. And I want to welcome some new associate members to the NDRIO family: Ontario Brain Institute, Snow Lab, the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, the Institute for Clinical and Evaluative Studies, Health Sciences North Research Institute, HPQC Labs, and Kai Hai have joined as associate members. So welcome to the NDRIO family. Next slide. So the next couple slides really just are there is to list all of our members, and many of you are joining us here today. So again, thank you. So these are our primary members here, and you can see that this is really a significant representation of the academic research enterprise of Canada. And our associate member base is quite broad as well. And these are all either active post-secondary institutions that have research activities that chose not to be primary members, or aligned organizations that are working in the DRI space that are interested in the work of NDRIO. So a robust membership. Next slide, please. Right, so we've been, we frequently pause to take stock of how we're doing in communicating with our members here. So it was important for us as part of this meeting to recap a little bit about what we've done in terms of engaging with all of you and with our stakeholders here. So through the fall of 2019, as we were building the NDRIO model, we had a cross-country consultation. We went from coast to coast, and over 200 people were consulted in that period of time. We've had a number of information meetings about membership. We've had special members meetings, and we've had a number of virtual member updates, July 28th, 29th, and obviously we have our AGM today. We had an extensive outreach activity associated with the formation of the Researcher Council. So we put together a 7-member multidisciplinary researcher group. We call them the Researcher Advisory Group, to support the development and recruitment of the Researcher Council, and we'll have a presentation on that later. And we did a broad-based consultation on that as well. And we had an extensive outreach associated with the recruitment of members for that, prospective members for that Researcher Council. And we've, through an open call for suggestions on bylaw, housekeeping amendments, any improvements we could make there. We had 2 submissions received, and Jenna mentioned those in the member meeting. So quite a bit of activity in terms of outreach with our stakeholder group. Next slide. Right, so to support this through communications, we have a number of email campaigns. I will say to you now that although we're infants in this, we are active in social media. We now have a Twitter handle, whatever it's called, and we're active on LinkedIn. We've done a number of presentations, updates with our partner and partner organizations, and a considerable number of meetings, work planning meetings with a variety of institutes and organizations across the country. So very active in member and stakeholder engagement. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what's ahead, and then I'm going to pause, take a break, and open it up for any questions. There are some, as I said here, I think this is a really important point of departure for NDRIO, the organization, and for the leadership. With our incoming CEO, it's important to take stock and think about the next year and a half, which is really the critical phase in the build of NDRIO. So if we can move on to the next slide here, just some things that are on the radar screen. And I'm encouraging you members and associate members to pay attention to these things, and to ensure that you are being apprised of what's going on, and that the commitments that we make as an organization to engagement and to validation of the work we're doing, you're holding us true to that. So establishment of our Researcher Council, this will be up and running very, very soon. And we'll talk about that a little bit later today. very important piece of work for us is to make sure Nizar starts on the right foot, and we'll be focused on his onboarding in October and making sure that he is out from coast to coast engaging with all of you. We will be, as I mentioned earlier, we have an opportunity to put in place some initial projects, some actual investments through an early process here. So we're planning right now to initiate a call, an open call for those projects in November of this year. Through December, there'll be continued refinement of our organization, our backroom functions, the underpinnings of the organization, and there'll be permanent organizational development activities that are going on over the next little while. We have an obligation to deliver an evaluation and risk framework, and that activity will be on the table in the fall, and we'll be further refining our member and stakeholder engagement plan, change management plans, our planning process, our new model development, and our work with Canary on transition and the development of a joint ecosystem plan. And last but not least, we also have an obligation here to develop a cybersecurity framework for NDRIO activities, and that'll be some work that we kick off here with the recruitment of some expert support. So these are things that are on the horizon. The reason I have them here is just these are things for all of you to watch and to and as a basis for updates from the organization going forward. I think that's all I've got. Is there another slide? Oh, okay, we're done. So that's enough of me rambling on. Why don't I open it up for questions or discussion? How are we doing for time? You okay? Right.
We're fine, George.
Yeah, so I got some questions about the NDRIO and Compute Canada joint committee. So we've got draft terms of reference that Robin Donjo and I have worked on here, and we've got those before the reps in the Compute Canada and NDRIO board that have been put in place. So those terms of reference will be finalized by that committee. And I mean, what I would say here is this is really just a way of ensuring that the two boards are on the same page, and that they're holding the two CEOs accountable for delivering on the transition plan that get to a seamless transition of activities between Compute Canada and ultimately NDRIO. And there's a lot of moving pieces in that. There's funding models, and there's disposition of staff. There's vision and service models. So really important that the two boards are together here, and that's really what's behind that. NDRIO is aware of CANSOC, correct? I don't know. No, well, I don't know what that stands for, Scott. I'm sorry. Jay, if you're out there, Scott's asked a question here. Yes, okay, the Shared Security Operations Center, yes. Yeah, I'm sure between Jay and Guillaume, they are familiar with that organization, Scott, and if you wanted to give us a little bit more advice in that space, it'd be welcome. As per key deliverables on the horizon slide, can you say more regarding the types of initial projects that will be solicited? Probably shouldn't do that right now. I think as we develop those, we'll make sure that those, the framework for those goes out for consultation, and that there's some engagement with the community. So it'll give you an opportunity to have a little bit of input, but I think I'd be getting a little bit ahead of the board, our board, and our development of those initial projects. And we also have an obligation to work with ISED to define those. Right, so can you remind us what ISED has established as matching fund requirements for NDRIO? Somewhere buried at the back of that slide deck, there is some appendices that, Michael, that I don't know if we can get that slide deck back up. Is that possible? Here it comes. Slide 55. Right, so here it is here. So under the new funding arrangement here, the ARC infrastructure and operations up to 60% federal for infrastructure, up to 100% for operations, 40% provincial institutional for infrastructure, and national services will be the full funding domain of NDRIO, 100%, and then direct services to researchers, notionally 25% for regional ARC, HQP, and 75% from provincial and institutional. So these matching requirements are posts for us to work towards, Michael, and the ability to achieve this will, this is part of why we're doing this current state assessment, to validate the ability to achieve these targeted matching requirements. So hopefully that answers your question. Happy to. This might be one where we want to have another chat. So a bit more on our board committees, membership mandate, will info and then be posted on the Engage website. So our board committees. Let me take that under advisement, Judith. Yeah, I think, I don't think there's no mystery to those, no secret to those, but I would need to chat with Janet a little bit about that and figure out how we would do that. Research institutes that are not hospitals, such as the Perimeter Institute and MILA, are not currently eligible for primary membership and therefore cannot vote in the meeting. I understand that there will be opportunities to join committees and work with NDRIO in other ways, but is there any way research institutes can be treated on the same level as research hospitals? We work through this in our bylaw work with the applicant board. And we did a lot of work in terms of defining how, what we should, how we should view primary members here. And we really relied on the definitions of the granting councils here to drive what we were thinking about. So at this stage, I don't think we're contemplating any changes to that here. This is really focused on post-secondary institutions that have active research activities and are eligible for granting council support. So that was our rationale, and this was hotly debated and discussed at the time by the applicant board, and that's where we landed here. But we're very, very committed. This organization is very committed and will be going forward to full engagement with associate members. And, if associate members along the way feel like there isn't the visibility or transparency into the work of NDRIO, they don't feel like they have opportunities to participate in the work, and there's a lot of work ahead of us here, then I think that's a matter of discussion with the leadership of the organization, and the associate members should and will find a way to have a big influence over the organization. Christina, what will be addressed in the change management plan that will be launched in December of 2020? Well, I think if it's really hard to say, Christina, what the specifics of that will be. And I know you and your colleagues from other host sites have been working closely with Guillaume and some of the regional groups in this. That work will evolve over time. And as the funding model work progresses and we get a better sense of the needs assessment and the strategic planning activities emerge, the specifics of change will come to the fore. And as a community, that's where we will need to articulate the destination and where we are now and how we get there. And, that could be anything from change strategies around funding to potentially something to do with staff, et cetera. So, I can't answer the question right now. That's something that will need to be defined and will need to be defined amongst all of us. So this next question is around, has there been consultations with provincial governments regarding needed provincial matching portion? Meeting 1.5, 2 years ago. Yeah. So there has been some initial consultation done with the provinces, I believe led by ISED, and I think that'll as the work that we're doing here to define the funding models and the requirements to fund the activities going forward within the umbrella budget that ISED has given us. The specifics of those engagements will emerge over time, and that will need to be something that gets factored into the overall, implementation of the vision. So some work has been done in consulting with provinces, and a lot yet has to be done. And I mean, one of the things that we're, not to get into any specifics here, but it's very uneven across the country, right? How things are funded from different levels of government. So, an understanding of the differential approach in different provinces and different regions, and how that needs to be leveled out to make sure that there's a common playing field. All those sorts of things need to be articulated before we get into specifics. Oh, I thought mercifully we're at the end of the questions here, but nope. What are the international comparators that you aspire to match or beat in terms of performance? In other words, what might inspire us to be the best in class globally? I'm not in a position to answer that today. I mean, this will emerge in Karen and those position papers that I was talking about, and the coming out of the work that Galen and her team are doing. And I'd encourage you to engage directly with Galen Roquette on the team here, and she and her analysts are doing a lot of work in that, and there are I think there are some good examples and best practices, but I think there's also lots of opportunity. I'm not sure any jurisdiction's got this perfect yet, it's got this right, so there's a good opportunity, I think, for Canada actually to be leaders in this as well, and to be a jurisdiction that others emulate. C'est fini. Okay, well, hearing no other questions, then I'm just going to thank you all for your patience with me walking through this presentation, and also your patience with NDRIO. I know there's great expectations out of this organization, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of engagement with you and a lot of support from you is critical to seeing the vision realized. And I really appreciate all the support that you've given us as members, encouragement and badgering sometimes. That's really important for us, and I encourage you to continue that going forward. So I'm going to finish there, Janet. I think I'm turning it back to you, am I not?
Yes, you are, George. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Guillaume Bourque. Dr. Bourque is the chair of NDRIO Research Advisory Group that we've spoken about already, a group of distinguished multidisciplinary researchers tasked with helping NDRIO shape the Researcher Council. At the September 8th board meeting, the Researcher Advisory Group advanced the names of 21 researchers to comprise NDRIO's inaugural Researcher Council. The board accepted their recommendation and further made the decision to appoint Dr. Bourque as the interim chair of the Researcher Council for a period of 6 months. In this capacity, he'll provide continuity and stewardship for the new council, And after 6 months, of course, the council will elect a new chair from within its membership. I would just make the point, you know, this is a work in progress. There's a lot of work done over a very short period of time. So I'd like to thank the Researcher Advisory Group for its integral work over the past few months, leading to the establishment of the Permanent Researcher Council. We'd also like to express our sincere appreciation for Dr. Bourque's ongoing dedication and service to the Canadian research community. So I will now welcome Dr. Bourque and turn it over to him, and we look forward to hearing from him about the inaugural Researcher Council, including the names of those appointed. So I'll turn it over to you, Guillaume.
Thank you very much, Janet. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Ça me fait vraiment plaisir d'être ici. Je vais faire la présentation en anglais, mais vraiment, n'hésitez pas là, si vous avez des questions à la fin ou des commentaires, à les faire en français, puis je vais pouvoir répondre avec plaisir. So, I'll be doing the presentation in English. So, it's really quite an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I've been involved in NDRIO in different capacities since the beginning, and it's just amazing to see the progress and all the work, actually. So when I initially signed up in this, I really didn't realize how much work was ahead, and it's just amazing to see all of the very important milestones that we've been achieving over the last year and then a few months. But I'm especially excited to be talking about the Researcher Council. So this is an item that was highlighted already very strongly in our consultation in the fall of last year as something that would be very critical to the organization. And it was highlighted by Janet in her opening speech and by Nipun as well. So it's really, you know, this is something that was recognized early on as something that was important, but we've now been able to really dig into this. So if I can have the next slide. So as I mentioned, this was mentioned already in the consultation in 2019, but many things had to be set up first in terms of the overall governance and membership. But we've now finally been able, as was mentioned, there was a researcher advisory group that was set up to really start planning what the Researcher Council would be and how it would be working. So this was done in May and June. So this advisory group, its task was really to develop and propose a governance model for the Permanent Researcher Council, was to launch the Researcher Council recruitment process, to assess the candidates and make recommendation for final approval, and to initiate the very important researcher needs assessment. So in order to deliver on this mandate, we actually had a consultation. So if I can have the next slide. So the people in this advisory group, I really want to take a second here to really thank them. So David Barclay, Matthew Choptwick, Erin Dickey, Catherine Middleton, Denis Terrien, and Deb Verhoeven. So, I mean, all of us as a group really worked very hard with lots of support, I must say, from the NDRIO management team over the summer months to work on this and really brainstorm and make progress towards the Researcher Council. So if I can have the next slide. So again, over this period of 4 months, we actually held a total of 17 meetings, lots of discussions, and you know, I think we really covered and discussed this at length in many aspects. I think recognizing how important the Researcher Council is going to be for the organization, we really spent quite a bit of time. And again, I'd like to thank the members of this committee and the support that we've received from many people from the NDRIO management team including in particular Allison, that really helped and worked, I was going to say night and day on this. So for your benefit, I'm really now going to go over some of the key steps and the key things that we did over the summer as a summary to explain how we actually landed on the Researcher Council that we have in place. So I'll start basically summarizing what took place in July. So if I can have the next slide. So, we hit the ground running very early because the group was established in June. We worked on a draft document, a draft governance model for the Researcher Council, which we posted for comments. This was done in late June. Again, we followed a model that I think has been quite successful for NDRIO since the beginning. So as much as possible, we post these draft documents on the Engage DRI website for comments from the community, and we're really keen on getting suggestions and comments. And then many of you have been very, very good in terms of looking at these documents and providing feedback. We also held 2 webinars, towards the end of that consultation feedback for comments. We had these seminars were very well attended as well. So we had 110 participants, both in English and French. So again, I'd like to thank the people on this call who actually took the time to attend these webinars and provide us some feedback. We also got lots of written submission. Again, this was early summer, so I very much appreciate the comments we've received. And the consultation participants really were quite diverse, and it was interesting because that is the challenge that we have in setting up the Researcher Council, is how can we build a body that's really going to be representative of the diversity of the research enterprise in Canada. So overall, we were encouraged by the feedback that we received. It was quite supportive of our draft document and our consultation paper. And one of the main thing was about asking for further details on the actual operation of the Researcher Council and how it would work with the NDRIO board and management. And this was some of the questions that we were having ourselves, I must say. And so this was very good feedback. And again, as Janet mentioned, this continues to be work in progress. I mean, obviously we want this Researcher Council to be a very active and useful group. And so any suggestions on how to do that, I think continues to be well received. So if I can have the next slide. So I'm not going to go into all of these details. I'll read some of this, but this is just some examples of the main feedback that we received through these consultations and how we made some changes to the governance model document based on this feedback. So the first point again is like this question of how do we make sure that the Researcher Council will really be whether it's going to be making decisions about funding allocations or whether it's going to be about defining the needs, and clearly we want to be explicit about the fact that it's going to make recommendations about the needs assessment, but the funding decisions obviously will rest with the board itself. So it will not be making operational funding decisions. It's really making recommendations only to the board on this. This question that the Researcher Council should represent all researchers and make recommendation on the researcher needs. So this is really the key for the Researcher Council, and we've expanded with additional details in the governance model about this. And you'll see in how we've set up the Researcher Council, we really thought very carefully about how as much as possible, we can make a researcher council that's a representative of the diversity of researcher voices there. And also highlight that one of the big tasks of the researcher council will not just to make a long list of unrealistic researcher needs, but also try to make recommendation to guide prioritization between these different needs, such that ultimately the NDRIO can make educated decisions on where to invest. So some comments on how, and suggestions on how to you really use the researcher council to build a good connection to the community as a whole, and really so there was lots of very good suggestions actually on that front from the consultations, which we also incorporated as much as possible into our governance model in terms of how to engage and reach out. So if I can have the next slide. So I've touched on this again. So how do we how can we have a good connection between the researcher council and the board, and also with the management? So we've added specific statements on this, and also discuss the role of the researcher council chair, who's going to be an observer on the NDRIO board. And there's also still some ongoing discussions within the board about having potential voting rights, but this is something that's really, there's some technical issues there that are being discussed at the board. One suggestion, this came from the consultations about an annual report by the Researcher Council that would summarize really these recommendations and the implementation. And so this, we've taken on and having now incorporated in our governance model, and we'll obviously use also the support of NDRIO to really be able to do this effectively. So this is also linked, I guess, to the next point. Obviously, for the Researcher Council to be effective, we will need support from NDRIO. And on this, again, I'd like to report how much, just looking at the last few months, how the NDRIO team has been extremely helpful in really guiding us and supporting us in the process. And I look forward to this continuing, obviously, with the full Researcher Council. There was one of the things that there was a bit of hesitation, but I think in the end this worked out quite well. But there was some questions about the recruitment process to the Researcher Council and the fact that we had a mixed model where there was an open call versus nomination. So we wanted to have a broad representation, so anybody could actually directly apply to the council, and we also had a nomination process. And you'll see later that this ended up working quite well. The fact that there should be a code of conduct, this was also added to the governance model. If I can have the next slide. So we had, so one of the things that we were asking, and we had support for a 15 to 20 member council. You'll see that, we ended up landing with a slightly larger council with a total of 22 members to really try to account to the diversity at multiple levels that we wanted to achieve. So again, I'll go into the details of that later in the presentation. The question of diversity of researcher representation at multiple level, regions, institution, language, career stage, EDI consideration. So this was really actually a very central topic that we discussed at length as part of the advisory group Again, I'll show more on this in our presentation. And finally, representation, of course, of the 3 pillars on the council. So if I can, next slide. So this was really, early in July, late June, early in July, in terms of really leading to the recruitment process that then took place in August. So if I can have the next slide. So for the recruitment process, our advisory group set up a selection committee, which was, there was a good overlap with the advisory group and the selection committee, except that we we augmented our group with Alexandra King as well, who joined for the selection committee. So as part of this, we looked at different, comparable models, recruitment models for similar organizations. We used the latest Tri-Council EDI questionnaire for our recruitment process. We consulted, so again, there was extensive work to look at other models and consulted with Tri-Council officials. We developed an electronic and confidential application process, some FAQs to help applicants applying. And NDRIO management actually helped us by recruiting additional staff to help us in the process. We reviewed all applications with 2 reviewers from our selection committees, giving scores on various aspects. We had, the process of conflict of interest, of course. Erin Dickey, who was on an advisory group, actually stepped down from the selection committee because she applied and so on. We gave as much time as possible with a 3-week window for applying. If I can, next slide. So the main, and this is an important point, the selection criteria was based on, of course, expertise in digital research infrastructure, ability to address and negotiate competing DRI interests, demonstrated strategic thinking and vision. We discussed at length, but we didn't want people representing their discipline on this council, although of course their experience in various disciplines is going to be important. But we really wanted a committee of people that could help and guide, discussions around all of research in Canada. So these were some of our questions were really centered around that. Effective communication skills, really to help us and help people in the council act as ambassador for the organization. Diversity of research discipline and DRI domain, diversity in institutional background, geography, linguistic diversity, early career versus established researcher, EDI. At some points in the process, we were like, how are we going to ever fill this matrix? But as you'll see in the next slide, so these were, it worked out, I think, quite well. But these were all of our selection criteria. Next slide. So EDI principles were front and center throughout the whole selection process. Again, we were tasked to strike a balance between all of these selection criteria, but also EDI considerations of gender, visible minority, Indigenous, disability. And we took some really proactive steps, I think, to take into account EDI principle. We recruited a consultant that was engaged to do targeted outreach. We did as best as possible to have a flexible deadline to accommodate potential EDI candidates. And the selection process included EDI considerations. And again, we relied on the Tri-Council EDI survey. Next slide. So this is a quick summary of some of the outreach activities. Most of this, again, was done by the NDRIO team. We reached out to colleges and institutes, Canada, reached out to Canary and Portage, Compute Canada, posted on LinkedIn, in NDRIO. And as I mentioned already, had some proactive outreach to EDI target groups as well, including Indigenous researchers. Next slide. Okay, so this was all of the planning work, I guess, and then we launched the process, and we're hoping to get candidates. If I can have the next slide. So we were very happy to see that once we launched the process, we really, you know, had a whole list of really excellent candidate apply, very strong pool of candidates. I must say that at that stage, when we saw the list, we were, you know, quite confident that we would land on a very strong researcher council. So we had a total of 137 eligible candidates. We had a good spread of English and French speaking scientists, including many early career, many submissions from primary members. So 35 out of the 51 primary members had submission. So at that stage, again, our task was going to try to select from this excellent pool of candidates a representative researcher council fitting our selection criteria. Next slide. So as I mentioned already, so again, let me remind you that this was all done in the summer, and I'd like to thank again all of the members of the selection committee, because over the summer, during our holiday, we split all of these candidates among ourselves. We had 2 independent scores from each of these candidates, and then we combined all of this. We had meetings to discuss and review these scores to look for, you know, try to assess discrepancies. There weren't that many discrepancies, so this was actually a pretty smooth step. And then the critical part was really this last step that's mentioned here is like, from this, you know, excellent list of candidates, how can we select candidates such that we're going to strike a balance between all of our different selection criteria, you know, again, by discipline, institution, geography, and EDI. Next slide. And I'm very happy to report that I think we landed on a very good distribution here. So this is just a quick summary again of these different selection criteria. So, you know, obviously excellent experience, DRI experience, and disability. So these were really sort of key criteria. I don't think we, we didn't have to compromise on these criteria at all. We really had excellent candidates in meeting these qualification and skills requirement. We had very good regional representation, you know, across the country. Good language, so English and français. Alors beaucoup d'applications avec des gens francophones. So we had good representation of our primary members, splitting down by DRI expertise. And one thing to say about this is that most of the applicants actually didn't really have expertise in one of these areas. Many had, you know, expertise in 2 and sometimes 3. So it was a bit of a, you know, it was hard to put people sometimes in any of these bins, which I think is good, good sign going forward. We had a good representation. I haven't talked about it in the presentation in much detail, but I think this is obviously going to be very, very important. Thinking about this tri-agency representation. One of the things, so I didn't talk about that, but on our advisory group, we also had good representation of the 3 councils. So by design, the advisory group had two researchers from SSHRC, from CIHR, and from NSERC. And it was very interesting to see, you know, the different perspective coming from these 3 councils and researchers coming from really very different disciplines with different requirements and different approach to DRI. And so we sort of had a taste of that in the advisory group. And I think, again, we've made sure that the council itself would also have that type of representation. So not only did we have a good representation of the TRI agencies, but also different disciplines, institutional representation. So we had, very good applicants from universities, including some small institution, research hospitals, no members from colleges, and I'll get back to that. This is perhaps something that we can work on. Good representation of early career, gender identity. So you see the numbers here. We achieve balance there. Visible minority with 5 members. Unfortunately, no members from Indigenous population. I'll get back to that in future slides. And 2 members highlighting some disability. So if I can have the next slide. So as you can see from the previous, that we met most of our selection criteria, again, except for securing members from colleges and Indigenous communities. Part of this is because we had very few applications, of course, coming from these groups. So only 7 applications coming from the college sector. And this is something, again, this is, I think as we were working on this over the summer, we kept repeating to ourselves, of course, we'll do as best as we can for this inaugural Researcher Council, but this is going to be a living thing. And obviously, we'll be able to continue improving on the Researcher Council. And so this is one area that we'll want to reach out and solicit more and hopefully complement. And similar comment relative to Indigenous representation. So this is something that we discussed quite a bit within our advisory group. We did undertake targeted outreach, but this is unfortunately an area that we weren't successful at filling in this initial inaugural council. But since following up on our outreach activities, we have had more discussions now with potential interest candidates. And again, we're hoping that this is something that we will able to fill in the future. So if I can have the next slide. I guess at this stage, maybe even just before I'll actually announce and look at the council itself, let me just provide a quick overview of what we've achieved as an advisory group. So we really developed and proposed a governance model for the Permanent Researcher Council. I should say that we've now have a nearly final governance model, but this will, will still be reviewed and commented on last time. We were successful in launching the Researcher Council recruitment process. We assessed and recommended candidates for the inaugural council and then submitted that, and we initiated the researcher needs assessment. So I just have a few more slides, and then I think we'll take a quick break before the question. But I'll move on now to my final slides here, which is really the inaugural Researcher Council. So I've shown you the breakdown by selection criteria, but if I can have the next slide. So these are actually, this is now the list of really excellent researcher that we selected. And again, I want to stress that we had many more candidates than this, but the final decision was really about trying to find the right balance between all of the different criteria that we were trying to balance. So you see the list of really stellar researcher here coming from a breadth of different university, different disciplines, and this group will really form the inaugural Researcher Council that is tasked, as you've heard from some of the presentation by George, to really, I think one of the key steps will be to work on the user needs assessment. If I can have the next slide. So these again are all pictures, I guess, associated with all of these people. So this was finalized with the board last week. We haven't had our first meeting yet. This will follow the AGM. So very soon, very shortly, we'll have our first meeting where all of these people will be brought up to speed on all the work that's been done already, and we'll start getting their input into the next steps. Maybe one more thing to say is that there was a sense of urgency to set up the council, and this was recognized by the organization very well, because obviously the voice of the researcher will be very important in the next steps, and so part of the decision to really push on establishing the inaugural researcher council was so that this council would be part of the next very important steps. So next slide. So I believe this is my last slide before we take a short break before the questions. So the key for the inaugural researcher council will be to get started straight away on the needs assessment. So a lot of work has been done already by Guillaume and the technical team, but we will now be asking for the council for input into this. As you know, and you've seen that in George's slide, we need to complete this needs assessment by December 2020. And this will be a critical piece for the strategic plan. So this will really be task number one on the researcher council's desk to identify the gaps, and determine the what's and so on. So the main deliverable of this will be to then integrate it into the position papers covering the ARC, the data management, and the researcher software. So the Researchers Council will oversee this development and will also include significant outreach and consultation with the community, as we've done in the past. Okay, so with that, I think maybe I think I'll pass it back to you, Janet. I understand
Yes.
that we're going to be taking a short break, and then after that, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. I think what we'll do is if people have questions on your presentation, I'd prefer to deal with those now. So they can do that through the chat function. And then, so we'll allot some time, probably 10 minutes or so to that. And then I'll close off this section, and then we can have a 5-minute break after that before we move into the fireside chat.
Okay, perfect.
So if people have any questions, comments, observations, please feel free to send them through the chat function.
Okay, so the first question is from Nikkei from HPQC Labs. So the primary, there's an open call for others now that that's over. So what's about the newly recruited associate members? So at this stage, we've closed the open call and the nomination call, right? So we've now established the researcher council. One of the things that I didn't discuss in much detail is that on the council, there's really going to be a rotation. So people will be on the council for a period of 1 to 3 years. So there's no question that there's going to be other calls for additional names to be submitted to the researcher council. But at this stage, we've pretty much closed this. So this will only come later on that will have that rotation. So yeah, so this is a question related to that. So all of the people on the council are going to be on the council for a period of 1 to 3 years. And we will, you know, unless there's specific areas, as I've mentioned in my presentation, where we identify gaps on the researcher council, and we might have some targeted recruitment to the council, other calls will come later on. So a comment more than the question. So the fact that the researcher council might have you know, scared off some early career due to anticipated workload. So this is a question from Scott Dillinger and from University of Alberta. And EDI balance skews to younger researcher as well. So I think that's probably a fair statement. I think it's true that we do anticipate a significant workload on the Researcher Council, especially in the fall, because of the very critical tasks that the Researcher Council will play. So we were explicit about that in our facts, and you're probably right that those might have been a concern for some people. I am happy to report that, you know, that being said, we did have a number of early career researcher, and I think in terms of the composition of the council, we do have I think a pretty decent, and we did match our objectives in terms of having that type of representation. So I think it's, yeah, so that's, I think at that level, we did match our criteria. Okay, so, maybe I can read this out loud because otherwise I can't. So first starts with a congratulation from Karen at UBC. So thank you very much for this. My question is on the Indigenous representation. Could you explain more about how talent funnel is being developed to ensure inclusions of Indigenous perspective? Indigenous data sovereignty is a key issue in Canada. This has been important implication with respect to, for example, environmental data. An inclusive, proactive, and flexible approach to Indigenous representation, hence, is critical in my view. So absolutely, and maybe I can turn it over to somebody from the NDRIO management team on this to talk a bit more about, again, maybe summarize again and talk about some of the efforts that we've done on that front and what's coming forward.
Sure, it's Allison Barr here. We, as mentioned in the slide deck, we actually did a targeted outreach to specifically Indigenous scholars, and we weren't as successful as we would have liked in order getting Indigenous applicants coming, but we at least opened the door, and we have a prospect list of a fairly significant number that are interested in the work of the council. So we think that there's opportunities to bring them on board through you know, future openings on the Researcher Council, and also you know, there also will be opportunities, as you mentioned, the Indigenous sovereignty data. So topic areas of interest might be something a working group could be established for to look into. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. So the next question is, how do non-council members voice their opinions or concern? And so thank you for the question, Nick from HPQC Labs. And to me, I'd like to go back to the questions also that was asked to George about associate members and also other research institutions and so on. So I think there's plenty of ways for people to voice their opinions and concerns directly through, you know, through the various feedback forums and consultation activities that we do. I think that, from my perspective, is the main way to really contribute, hopefully, to the discussion. So a lot of the documents, again, before they're finalized, are being posted on the website. And we are really looking forward for questions and feedbacks on those. As you could see in my slides, we actually received quite a bit of feedback on the initial documents that we posted on the governance model, and we had tons of excellent suggestions on you know, this idea of having an annual report and things like that. So I would really encourage comments and opinions being provided in that way. I don't know, George, if you want to add on this or.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just a couple observations. You know, the Researcher Council is intended to be the voice for the researcher community, notwithstanding whether they represent members or other institutions, right? This is not a representative group where they're bringing particular institutional perspectives or even domain perspectives as their primary role. So, you know, the work of this council over time should include engagement with the research community and should represent the interest of researchers across the country in general. So, you know, the mechanisms for doing that, how we bring those perspectives, those you know, vastly diverse perspectives to the table through the work of this council is still to be determined. But the idea there is really that this is to represent the you know, the full range of interest of the researcher community, not just institutional perspectives or discipline perspectives per se.
Perfect, thank you. And again, we will be reaching out with lots of questions, especially thinking about the user needs assessment. I mean, we do need suggestions and questions, and we need to understand those needs. So I would really encourage you to provide feedback. So the next comment is a congratulations. So thank you very much, Judith. So it's been quite an ordeal, but I must say that all of us were also, as I mentioned, very pleased at the end product. So it was a lot of work, but and there were times where we were like, how are we gonna, you know, have a way to fit or to fill all of these different criteria? But I think we were quite successful on most of these fronts. So the next question from Jonathan Bagger at Triumph: how can we contact NDRIO staff? I don't see a directory on the web, so I don't know if somebody can answer this question. Allison or Jay?
Yeah, it's George here. I mean, I think if you go onto our website, there should be an email contact, a general email contact to engage DRI. So you can always get to us through that. And I don't know whether we have our actual email addresses up there or not, but I think that would be my advice, is to go through the website if you have any specific connections and that you want to make, and we'll facilitate the dialogue.
Okay, and the next one is a constructive suggestions from Scott at University of Alberta, mentioning that he could reach out to Faculty of Native Studies. So we will for sure reach out to you for that. Thank you, Scott. A question by Eric from Memorial University of Newfoundland: beyond the volunteer position, what is being done to promote equity in hiring within NDRIO? Again, maybe this is a question I could send back to you, George.
Right. So, you know, as part of our constitution as an organization, the concept of you know, the EDI concepts are core to what we're doing, not only with in our engagement, but also internally. And we're in the process of developing our HR processes right now, and that commitment to EDI and our hiring processes that are modern and focused on diversity will come to the fore through that mechanism. So you know, we're still in interim status right now. The permanent organization will be built, and those kind of HR policies and commitments will be manifest in that permanent organization.
All right. And a final comment from Scott again, congratulating us on this. I see another comment. The process for nomination of Researcher Council is impressive, congrats, but has to be mentioned that the call for candidate was done at a non-optimal point in time, absolutely, during a COVID and summer holiday. Many potential candidates were not available to consider and submit an application. I imagine that any further recruitment will be done in such a way that it will favor candidates to consider submitting their name. So absolutely. Again, here we really had to strike a balance between doing this at this speed. I was muted. Sorry, I was unmuted. I'm unmuted now, I believe. So yeah, so I was saying that this was really to strike a balance between having a researcher and council in place for the very critical user needs assessment, but absolutely for future recruitment, we will make sure that there is proper warning and more time being given for applicants. So at this point, I think I would just, I'll wrap up my section. I'd like to thank one more time, again, the members of my committee, the Researcher Advisory Group, who worked tirelessly over the summer on this. I'd like to thank the people from the NDRIO team who helped us in the process. And finally, I'd like to thank the researchers who applied. Again, we had more names than we could select. And there's going to be other opportunities to contribute in other contexts. And I would really encourage you to reach out to us to help us in the context of the next step. It seems like we're never done. The next step is always the critical one. But back to you, Janet.
Well, thank you, Guillaume, very much for the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, the Researcher Council is a very important initiative for NDRIO. I must say, in reading the questions that were coming forward, it's reaffirming because the board in their discussions also raised many of those questions about its timing. We've got to get something in place, but it's a work in progress. We've identified important things around EDI, and there were two, and Guillaume mentioned them, Indigenous as well as college. Are two areas that we agreed need to be looked at. But the board was very impressed with the caliber of talent that the candidates that were brought forward for the final selection. The diversity of the council is a work in progress, as I've already mentioned, and there's still work to do. But I think we're very proud of the fact that we have had the opportunity to appoint this inaugural Research Council with Guillaume as interim chair, and we look forward to working with them. So I want to thank you, Guillaume, and the council Guillaume, for your work to date, and the RAG for the work that they've done in getting the council together, but certainly to convey to the members of the council our appreciation for the work that is going to be coming down for them to focus on. So I think what I will do right now is I'll put the meeting on hold for 5 minutes. I know people need to get a break, so we'll put it on hold and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. So thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone. Before we move on into the next part of the agenda, I just wanted to remind people that a copy of all of the slides will be posted on the website. So you'll be able to see all of the slides that the speakers have been using. But now moving on to the next part of the agenda, as you know, after an extensive international search, I'm very happy to introduce you all to our special guest speaker today, Nizar Ladak, who will begin his tenure as NDRIO Chief Executive Officer beginning on October the 5th. With a career spanning nearly 30 years, Nizar joins us from Compute Ontario, where he is currently president and CEO. He's also held senior roles with Health Quality Ontario, North York General Hospital, and the Canadian Institute for Health Information. Nizar understands Canada's DRI space extremely well. He shows passion and energy for both the vision and work required to build the new model, an organization that will serve the research community from coast to coast. His style of servant leadership places Canada's researchers, our members, and stakeholders at the forefront. Excuse me. Following his remarks, Nizar will be joined by Peter MacKinnon, who's our board vice chair, who will moderate a virtual fireside chat and Q&A session. Please send your questions for Nizar via the chat function, again, the bottom of your screens. So without further ado, I'll welcome Nizar.
Thank you, Janet. To my colleagues at Lumi, I trust I'm being heard okay. All right. So thank you for this opportunity. Dear board directors, NDRIO members, colleagues, and friends. In my first remarks as inaugural CEO, it would be remiss of me not to begin by paying tribute to the pioneers whose vision led to the formation of NDRIO. I'm referring to many individuals and organizations, and it would take the remainder of my time to identify each by name. However, a few groups I ought to acknowledge are the Leadership Council for Digital Research Infrastructure, the Government of Canada, NDRIO's applicant board and the interim team, many partners, and of course, Canada's researchers, who want nothing more than the tools to propel Canada onto the international stage as a leader in the knowledge economy. As I wrote this speech, I thought deeply about what I wanted to convey. I then realized it didn't matter what I wanted. I needed to address the question that many of you have legitimately asked. Specifically, how will things be different through NDRIO? In other words, could we paint a picture of what the future holds? The answer is, yes, we can. It's your vision of the DRIO ecosystem that NDRIO hopes to facilitate. What we will learn about your vision through the first strategic planning exercise for NDRIO, be assured all of you will feature prominently in its planning and execution. Another group that will feature prominently is, of course, NDRIO's board. I could not be more humbled by the caliber of NDRIO's board and their selfless contribution to our organization. NDRIO's board is a cadre of individuals who, like captains of a ship, will steward us towards a destination and course correct should we ever deviate from that path. The theme of my remarks is to look forward, but we must also appreciate where we have been in order to understand where we wish to go. In the earlier part of today's AGM, George and others have shared what NDRIO has accomplished to date. Progress, I hope, you will see as a strong step forward. Guillaume has just recently announced our Researcher Council. I want to state publicly that I personally intend to participate in all Research Council meetings so I can learn directly from those we serve. One of my sincere joys is learning about the remarkable achievements that occur daily by researchers and the highly qualified personnel who make their researchers' dreams a reality. Now, I've spoken about where we wish to go, but I feel we must also call out our limitations in order to make them redundant in the future. Our limitations have emerged over decades and will take time to address. I feel our limitations can be described by three nouns: division, segregation, and competition. In that context, I hope we aspire for a future that espouses unity, integration, and collaboration. We see division in our ecosystem. Individuals and organizations hold different roles. For example, those who manage computing environments and those without computing environments. Provincial versus federal, physical sciences and the humanities. Indeed, we have a system of divided parts, but what we strive for is an ecosystem that is a complex network of interconnected systems. We have segregation of components. We have advanced research computing, research data management, research software, and networking, as though each were sufficient in and of themselves. Yet the reality is, in Canada's DRI ecosystem, the sum will be far greater than its individual parts. Instead of segregation and segregated components, we strive for a truly integrated ecosystem of interdependent relationships. Indeed, this very segregation is what motivated the need for NDRIO's formation. Finally, we have a system where during infrastructure competitions, BC competes with Ontario or Quebec competes with Atlantic Canada for limited financial resources. By design, infrastructure competitions as currently conceived have clear winners and losers. Yet we express surprise when best practices are not widely shared with each other. And yet, why would these best practices proliferate when intellectual property or niche practices actually spell the difference between success or failure in the next impending infrastructure competition for millions of dollars? My colleagues, as we turn the page in the evolution of Canada's DRI landscape, I believe we will evolve from division, segregation, and competition to our new nouns: unity, integration, and collaboration. Now, you may be all thinking, inspiring words, Nizar, but the fundamental question is, how do we go from where we are today to where we collectively wish to be? Well, the stark reality is, if it were easy, we would have done it already. There is no silver bullet, no magic wizard behind a screen. We all know it'll be through hard work, diligence, laser focus on vision, sheer determination, and perseverance. NDRIO's job will be to facilitate processes so that we are all working towards the same goals and using a common set of principles in our work. In the organizational literature, this is widely known as mission, vision, and values. And so I'm going to conclude by sharing our preliminary thoughts and plans for the creation of mission, vision, and values. For the next several months, I commit to conducting a listening tour with stakeholders across the country, building on the consultation work that has already taken place. Having personally led this kind of a tour previously on a few occasions, the biggest difference is that I'm unable to speak with you in person because the pandemic has limited my ability to do the very thing I love to do most: meet and chat with all of you in person. Instead, Zoom and MS Teams will have to facilitate our interactions until it is safe for us to meet in person. Now, when we do chat, I will be building on work that my teammates like Guillaume and George and the team have developed, including a current state review and needs assessment. This work, in addition to what I hear from you, will serve as inputs for the strategic planning session. From that, my board at NDRIO will construct a strategic plan that will be disseminated to all of you. Once again, we will ask an important question: did we get it right? Team, we have much to achieve together. I, for one, could not be more motivated or excited by what lays ahead. As I've written in response to the hundreds of emails, and thank you for those, that I've received since my announcement, I am daunted by the challenges we foresee, but I'm reassured by the outpouring of support from coast to coast that we have also received. And so in conclusion, I leave you with a few phrases that I feel will guide our work going forward. The past is our teacher. Let us learn from our past missteps and not repeat them. The present is our opportunity. Let us take full advantage of our collective strengths and shared ambitions for our system. The type of future we wish to achieve is our common motivation as we elevate the one group we all serve, Canada's researchers. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
And thank you, Nizar. As Janet mentioned, this is going to be a fireside chat. We do not have a fireplace, a fire, or chairs by the fire, so you're going to have to use your imaginations. Nizar, thank you for your remarks. I wonder if I could begin by asking you to expand on the themes of unity, integration, and collaboration that you mentioned. What needs to happen in these areas?
Thank you, Peter. I think we routinely use DRI system And I think we have more work to do to truly call ourselves a system. A system, by definition, to me, is a set of things that work together as part of an interconnected, interdependent, and interactive mechanism. Today, I think we only fulfill one of those components in that we are interacting with one another. I don't feel we are demonstrating the behaviors or practices that would suggest we are interdependent or interconnected. NDRIO's very formation stemmed from the recognition that RDM, RS, and ARC were not functioning interdependently or interactively. Yet the concept is so obvious in many ways. What good are a bunch of million-dollar computers if the data doesn't exist in organized ways or supported with software that maximizes its use? So I sincerely believe, Peter, that if we collaborate and set aside our tendencies to behave independently, Canada can be a leader on the global stage in the knowledge economy.
Good. You've talked about or alluded to opportunities and challenges. What are some of the bigger opportunities that you see?
You'll remember you asked me this question during the selection interview, and I had shared the experience that when visiting other countries, and I was talking about DRI, I learned that the very thing that makes us Canadian is also our niche in the global market. And what I'm referring to is our multicultural identity and our respect for multiculturalism. So let me explain by way of an example. For all of those watching today, and thank you for being here, I'm going to ask you that this evening, go ask a friend, a family member, or a significant other to perform a task using their cell phone or even on a Word document. For some of you, they'll perform it in the same way that you perform it. For others, the outcome will be the same, but the tactic will be different. And the likelihood that the tactic will be different will also probably depend on the individual's gender or ethnocultural background. This is because our lived experiences are shaped by virtue of our gender and our ethnocultural backgrounds. These identities influence the way we interact and see things. In Canada, the likelihood that a product or software was created by a multicultural team is quite high. So for example, you'll have a team that's comprised of a French Canadian, someone from South America or Europe participating in a common team to design a product. And their lived experiences shape the programming method or the tactics that they're going to use. So as a result, what I found is the adoption rate of Canadian exports is substantially higher because in foreign markets, the very products that we're exporting were designed by similar people who have similar lived experiences to the intended users from these countries. And I think, Peter, this is our big opportunity to exploit and a strength that we can maximize on the global scale.
Thank you. Let's go from the opportunities to the challenges. What are some of the challenges and how might we overcome them?
Yeah. As someone who thinks of himself from the system, I believe we have misaligned incentives. For example, our existing resource model, I feel, places a disproportionate burden on a selected number. For example, as I'd also shared in my opening remarks, we have a system where our colleagues are asked to compete during cyber infrastructure competitions and are then expected to share the very best practices that enable them to win the competition. So, but to be clear, I'm not suggesting competition is bad or should be avoided. What I'm suggesting instead is that we include incentives in the way we structure these processes to promote collaboration. So for example, including selection criteria that gives more weight to proposals composed of teams from a variety of different provinces and across provincial boundaries. We could also include expectations where interprovincial training and development is a required component of every software installation. We could seek ways where each province receives funding for HQP development, and when that occurs across provincial boundaries, the incentives could increase. However, the best part about all of this is, in order to address the solutions, I believe we need to consult with the very people where the solutions exist in the minds and the hearts of those working within this sector. And so in my new role, I hope to turn to our HQP. I believe they who are serving Canada's researchers faithfully, and if we ask them how we should address these challenges, I believe we'll find that opportunity. I think NDRIO's role is to be a catalyst for their ideas and help through our position to shine a spotlight on those very solutions. To use an academic analogy, while the stage may be ours, I think the lectern needs to be turned to give in the HQP to make their work possible.
Thank you. And as members and researchers manage their daily work, including adapting to the impacts of COVID, how does that affect how NDRIO engages with the community?
It's going to sound a little odd for me to say this, but I think COVID has been both a curse and a blessing. I think when the whole country went online and started utilizing video conferencing and Zoom and things like that, many of those in the DRIO ecosystem had already routinely been meeting by video conference for years, where we conducted our work remotely. Yet some of the richest conversations often happen when a researcher has the opportunity to just walk down the hallway and explain their challenge versus now having to book a formal appointment or set up a video conference call. This AGM is another example. I was sincerely looking forward to developing relationships with our members in person or over a coffee by virtue of being in the same location. Unfortunately, while my tactics will have to change, I'm hopeful that the outcomes will remain similar. Now, COVID's been a bit of a blessing, however, because never before, do I believe, has the public or policymakers had an opportunity to witness firsthand the relationship between research, computing, and the immediate impact to their daily lives. So when a politician or a policymaker now asks, how does DRI benefit Jane Smith from rural Ontario or rural British Columbia? Our response is that COVID has demonstrated the value proposition of DRI in very meaningful ways.
Thank you. And I see that you're a 90-day planner, Nipun. So what are some of the highlights of your 90-day plan?
Yeah, I love 90-day plans, and there's a great book by a Harvard professor who coined the term, and I've used them in each of my 3 former roles. But where one of the benefits is that thanks to Guillaume and George and the team, as a result of the number of consultations that George had shared in his year in review, we've already assembled a great deal of information to build upon. So I'm not starting with a blank slate. Highlights of the planning process as I'm thinking about it, and I'm hoping to obviously strongly look towards the board to help shaping it, is to create opportunities to hear firsthand from our members the answer to 2 questions I've typically asked in these 90-day plans. What works well and what could be better? And then from that, I believe the board and our management team will then translate this work into an operating plan that our members will once again have the opportunity to comment on. But if I was to pick 2 defining characteristics of the 90-day planning process, it would be, in my view, something that's highly consultative and also transparent.
That gives us clues, but would you expand? What kind of a leader do you aspire to be for NDRIO?
One of my favorite quotes is by John Quincy Adams. And Adams said, if your actions inspire people to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And so the kind of leader I aspire to be is a servant leader. My graduate degree and my studies for the past few decades have been in leadership and in organizational design. And servant leadership for me flips the typical leadership script by putting people ahead of power. The servant leader prioritizes their team's growth and well-being, letting their own needs and ambition take a back seat. Now, this desired leadership style, one I aspire to be, has been influenced by events in my life that make it very personal for me. You see, Peter, my father passed away when I was about 11 years old, and I was raised by a single mother and 2 older sisters. And when I entered my 20s and 30s, I would run into family friends who would share stories about my mother and my father, and how the concept of service was more than an act for them, but a defining principle that shaped who they were. They both instilled in me the need to think of others in everything I do. And so I consider the type of leader I aspire to be is someone who thinks about the work that I have been a part of and the teams that I've had the privilege to lead as my lasting legacy.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're at the point where we can open the floor to questions. And I believe Jay, you are going to, Jay Black, that is, you are going to assist us with these. So please.
So I see a question or a comment. Thank you, Allison. It's my privilege to be here, and I am sincerely looking forward to working with all of you as well. So there's a question from Michael at the Institute of Particle Physics. How do you see NDRIO coordinating the execution of its mission with those of the Tri-Council agencies and CFI? It's a great question. I think one of the things that's important is to gather as much information as we can from the various stakeholder groups. When you have a national organization with as far-reaching a sort of mandate as NDRIO, engaging the Tri-Council agency, SHRC and others, and CFI. CFI has a unique vantage point. They've helped create the initial DRI systems on the ARC side of the house and in other areas. But even beyond the Tri-Council agencies and CFI, I strongly expect to be consulting with Canary. There's been a variety of different organizations that have been brought forward. So it's going to be quite challenging, Michael, to be honest, to sort of ensure we have a process where people have had feel that they've had the sincere opportunity to contribute and provide input to. But that's where I'm going to depend on my team to make sure we can do that as extensively as possible.
Any further questions coming, Jay? Do we have any further questions?
Nope.
And the answer is no. So I'm just simply going to go back to you, Nizar, and ask you if you have any final comments for members today.
Sure, I do have a couple. As I leave all of you and look forward to starting officially on the 5th of October, I guess I want to convey a couple of points to our members. The first is I'm going to ask for your patience. We're going to work hard to achieve our aims, but it's going to take some time. And while we're all very excited about trying to get to a certain outcome, I've learned over my career, there's no substitute for thorough due diligence. And the second point that I want to leave you with that I'd love for all of you to reflect on is I've always believed that anybody can make the decision between good and bad. The tough and really difficult thing to decide between is making decisions between the good and the good. And so my board will be faced with some very tough decisions. And so I see my job and my team's job with your help and your partnership to give them as much information as we can so that they're enabled to make the best decisions for our ecosystem and our researchers. And I'm sincerely hoping to count on all of your support to be able to do that.
Thank you very, very much, Nizar. It's going to be a very exciting time ahead. Janet, are we in the position of going back to you?
Do see some additional questions.
Yeah, there are a number of additional questions here. I would suggest if you can respond to these, that'll be fine, Nizar. Then I would also suggest to the audience, if there are other questions you have, don't hesitate to forward those to the organization, and we will certainly ensure that there is a response to them.
So let me try and address them as quickly as I can, but also being respectful of time. And so Janet, don't hesitate to cut me off if I lose track. But Karen from World Data Systems at the University of Victoria is asking, how do we see NDRIO engaging with the international community? And what focus areas and mechanisms do we anticipate will be at the forefront? I think that much of what we do in our sector is in some ways new, and in some and so it behooves us to be able to engage with our international colleagues. So I can tell you that I have strong relationships with NCSA in the United States, with Australia, and with the United Kingdom, and supercomputing agencies and organizations with similar mandates, ISED in the United States. So I'm really looking for forums where we can begin to share best practices. I'll tell you right now, Karen, one of the things that struggles in my mind is obviously the funding mechanism and the cost sharing. Those are things that keep me up at night. And so rather than trying to solve an age-old challenge, I'm hoping to turn to some of our international partners and say, what's working in your environment? What are the good things? What are the things that you would accept and change? And so it's in a nutshell, it's seeking their advice and their counsel of what's worked in their jurisdictions and seeing if we can adopt and modify and make it a truly Canadian based approach. Thank you, Judith. Thoughts re-engaging with provinces to ensure a solid level of engagement for institutions across the country. I think I'm hopeful that what you all derived from my comments is that I'm a person who really believes in consultation. And so I'm looking to both the regional organizations, who I believe will continue to have a leadership role. I'm looking to provincial governments, but I'm also looking to organizations that, in my opinion, have stepped up to the plate. Organizations like our national host sites on the ARC side, organizations that have been leaders like Carl on the data management side and others. And so I think while as exciting as it would be to look at an opportunity to consult with every single institution, I believe pragmatics is going to dictate the approach that we take, where we may be working with representative bodies or professional associations, or even asking them to potentially host opportunities for us to go with our challenge and our questions as we seek their guidance in moving forward. So those are some of the, I would say, early day thoughts, Judith. Randall, the federal government changes party every 5 to 10 years. Will you proactively engage with the other parties in order to ensure support of NDRIO? Unquestionably, yes. What I would say is that having had a 30-year career in a variety of different governments, and then having great advice at my fingertips from people like George and Janet, who've done this far more effectively than I have, is you don't necessarily always want to align yourself with a political ideology as much as you want to align yourself with what's good for the country. And on that supersedes any political ideological change that happens every 5 to 10 years. And so my relationships that I'm going to count on very strongly are with Assistant Deputy Minister Vats and others within the bureaucracy who will carry forward our message regardless of the political stripe that arrives, whether red, blue, or orange. And so, so I think it's, you know, as I shared in my opening remarks, the ability to be able to go to ministries federally and provincially that wouldn't necessarily have paid attention to our sector, but have now, by virtue of the live experiment of COVID, where I've talked to agriculture, I've talked to transport, and people are seeing that the way we've navigated through COVID is by virtue of routine access to data, equipping our policymakers and our decision makers with that data and with research that will help benefit their citizenry. In my mind, this is our time. This is NDRIO's time to truly highlight the value proposition that we can make for Canada. Chris, you're welcome for the remarks. One thing we currently do well in Canada is we make it easy for Canadians to work with our international collaborators, more so than other countries. Will this continue? In my sincere hope, I would tell you yes. I can also share with you that in my preliminary conversations with the selection committee who made the decision to bring me on, they very strongly emphasized international outreach and international collaboration. So it's my hope that that will continue. The other thing I would say is we have this interesting scenario now, Chris, where many of our colleagues, many of our Canadian expats from Silicon Valley or many of those supercomputing sites south of the border are actually turning to us and saying, maybe it's time I come home. You've got 4 now AI premier institutes in the country. You've been able to attract, you know, talents like Jeffrey Hinton and oh, I knew I would draw a blank in his name, my colleague at Mila and others. But anyways, we're seeing this sort of reverse brain drain where many of our Canadians want to come back. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to do some international collaboration. Laurie, thank you. And I agree, it's going to be a fun ride, a good one, I hope. And Nike, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, would anything major change for the users of Compute Canada? Well, I mean, as it's been well documented, Compute Canada has been playing a leadership role in terms of the transition towards this new organization. And so I'm not necessarily sure what's necessarily meant, but don't hesitate to reach out to me in terms of what specific concern or challenge you might have. I will share with you, I've been a member of the Compute Canada Federation for the past 5 years. I've got terrific working relationships with their CEO, Robin Turgeon, many of their board members, and I'm hoping to utilize this opportunity for a successful and an effective transition with many of our colleagues across the country. I don't see any reason they shouldn't be. And I believe, I'll ask Cynthia, who is our communications lead, I believe this actual whole AGM is going to be recorded and placed on the website, but I'm not sure if I'm 100% accurate there. It will be? Okay, my colleagues are telling me it will be. So, but I would happily provide my remarks in writing if you would like as well, so you can share them with others. And then Anna, I'm just conscious of time. Anna, as many of us are navigating the partnerships between industry and academia, thank you for raising that. What's our vision for NDRIO's interaction with entrepreneurial and industry-driven efforts? I will say that I am very supportive of industry engagement. I believe that we have a time in our future or in our present where the nature of spend, the nature of innovation cannot solely be done alone by the public sector. There is opportunities that exist by virtue of industry partnerships that we can help propel all Canadian researchers, which is the one audience that we serve. And I can leave you with a particular statistic, Anna, that has, I think, been enormously illustrative of what we're dealing with. I'm a big component of looking at advantages for cloud computing and thinking about cloud computing as a way to supplement on-premises applications and on-premises solutions that have existed at least in the advanced research computing sector, and also looking at the private sector for ideas and innovations as it corresponds to research data management and research software. And the statistic I would leave you with is when we've looked back at the spend that's been made available just by one of the global behemoths, Google or Amazon Web Services. For the better part of the last 5 years, we've spent over about $350 million with CFI grants and provincial contributions and host site contributions on the ARC side of the house. I don't have off the tip of my head knowledge of what we spent in research data management and software, but we spent about $350 million nationally to create, premier sites. Google spends that per day. $350 million in maintenance and new systems per day. And so I think as we think about our first and foremost responsibility to provide researchers in Canada with the tools and the opportunities to propel their research globally, I think we have to look at it better industry engagement. I think that does it for me in terms of questions, Jay. So perhaps I'll turn back to you, Janet, or am I handing it to George?
Well, I can thank you, certainly, Nizar. I mean, you've obviously been thanked by Peter, but on behalf of all of us here, I want to thank you for your very articulate and quite passionate remarks, which I was part of the selection committee, and so I'm very pleased that you're joining us, and I think it'll take us forward where we need to be. So. Thank you for that. And I'll now ask George. I'm going to turn it over to George for some comments, and then I will wrap it up.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Janet. And thank you, Nizar, for really, really terrific remarks. I think, the future is very bright for NDRIO under Nizar's leadership, and we're all very grateful for him stepping up to the challenge ahead, and the concept of servant leadership is one that is perfectly suited for the work that NDRIO is going to be carrying out here. So again, congratulations, wonderful choice, and very optimistic about your leadership going forward. Couple of little things here as we wind down. As Nizar said, the AGM. All the material here will be posted on the NDRIO website for your reference. So if there's anything in particular you want to relook at, it'll all be there, and you can get back to us on any questions or follow-up that you have, and we're very diligent on addressing those. We have a post-AGM survey that will be in your inboxes in the coming days. Your feedback's really important. We're still maturing our approach to AGMs, and so your feedback in terms of this first AGM is going to be very important. So please take the time to do that if you may. I want to just take this opportunity. There's nothing quite as upsetting or alarming as a sentimental old man, but I am going to take this opportunity to provide some thank yous, some personal thank yous to some people here that have been very important to the work in NDRIO to date. First of all, I want to again pay tribute to some of the visionaries that brought NDRIO to life and to pushing it towards its full potential here. In particular, Laurie McMullen, who I know is on the call today, Robin Toronjo, Nizar mentioned, who's now the CEO of Compute Canada, Gail Murphy, who's on our NDRIO board of directors, and many, many others that were in on proposal writing and doing the hard work to make the case to the federal government for funding. So I want to pay tribute to you. This organization will not forget your contribution, and we have the touchstones of your Leadership Council reports and position papers. We refer to those frequently, and they will be referred to, I know, in the future. The board of directors, the 15-member board of directors, I just want to say how encouraging it is to work with such a wonderful group of professional volunteers like you. I mean, this has been heavy lifting for a board over the last several months, and you've stepped right up to the mark for us. You've led the organization, and to Janet Davidson, I just want to provide a little bit of a personal thanks. Getting to know you and work with you has been wonderful, and hopefully we stay connected into the future. And I know your leadership of the board is going to augur well for the future. And also Peter MacKinnon, who was part of the applicant board and is vice chair of the current board. Peter, your wisdom and steady hand is really, really important to the organization. So Janet and Peter, thank you very much for your guidance and wisdom, and also to the rest of the board members, thank you for all of your hard work and commitment. To my colleagues at ISED, Nipun, Vats, and in particular, Sinead Tuitt and Nadine Bernier, the relationship that NDRIO has with ISED goes much beyond a traditional funder-recipient relationship. We are truly fellow travelers, and the engagement is always encouraging and uplifting. And I want to thank you. If you're on the call here, hopefully you are, for all of that work. And I know Nizar will have the proceeds of that relationship going forward as well. I have some great counterparts and partners that I've been working with over the last several months. Jim Gadbane from Canary and Robin Toronjo from Compute Canada, I mentioned, have been great partners, and engagement between the organizations is growing, and there'll be a lot of work relating to transition and the fundamentally good relationships we've established between the organizations are going to be important for that transition going forward. And the host sites and regional groups Nizar mentioned have also been very, very active working with us. And as Nizar said, the design of much of what we're going to end up with here is going to be led by and informed by your ongoing involvement. So thank you very much. Last but not least, and this is very important to me, I just want to thank my interim team, and some of them go back even further than I do on this file. Alison Barr, who's early work in governance, setting up governance for the organization, leading consultations, and most recently on the establishment of the Researcher Council, working as key support to Guillaume. Has been wonderful, Alison. Thank you very much. Rees, when we started this little enterprise last summer, we were bankrolling the the national consultations off of our own credit cards. We had no contribution agreement, no money in the bank, and we had very limited prospects for seeing that coming together in a speedy fashion. Norm came in as our interim CFO and started off setting up little bank accounts for us and establishing our spreadsheets, and has really grown the backroom of this organization into something that's it's really great. And Norm, it's been wonderful working with you and getting to know you. Guillaume Roquette, Guillaume I know is on the call here today. Guillaume is really the corporate wisdom. She is our strategic brain, unflappable, highly productive, and just a tremendous leader in this space. So Guillaume, thank you so much. And I know you've got a very clear vision for what NDRIO can be. And you know, I think if we listen to you and we seek out your wisdom on a regular basis, we're going to be on the right track. So again, thank you for your friendship. More recently, Mark Haley's come in as our HR lead, and Mark, wish we had you on board months earlier. I know you'll be working very closely with Nizar and building the organization and getting the right foundations in place from an HR perspective. And last but not least, Liz Carter, who, without a word of exaggeration, works on behalf of this organization 7 days a week. I know because I ask her to do things on the weekend. So she supported the whole team tirelessly, and the board as well. And Liz, we owe you a huge debt of gratitude. And I release you and send you towards Nizar now. And I know he will be enslaved by you just like I have. So thank you so much. You know, we've accomplished a lot. I won't go over this again. It's been a really productive first year and a productive 6 months since our first meeting together. The heavy lifting is ahead. We've talked about that. There is a significant amount of work as we're building out the vision. You know, I think the leadership in this organization is going to really set it off in the right direction. My advice to all of you as members is stay engaged, stay patient, but have high expectations of this organization. Demand the best out of it, and it will deliver for you. So thank you very much, and I'll be watching carefully from a distance on how you proceed. Janet, back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, George, and thank you for your outstanding leadership since the early days of the organization, right up until now. I think you've accomplished an incredible amount over a very short period of time, and your contributions to NDRIO and its success will leave a lasting legacy, not just to the organization, but to the country. You've been a true leader, you've been a mentor, and you've been a friend to all of us. Today's AGM marks your last official act as an interim executive director. But on behalf of the board, the leadership team, our membership and stakeholders, I want to thank you very much. We couldn't have done this without you, and we certainly offer the very best wishes for what lies ahead for you in your next chapter. So we know now, I guess, that the open road on your motorcycle awakes. So that I hadn't somehow thought of, I don't know why I didn't, but George Ross motorcyclist. So I want to again just thank you for all of your contributions. They're remarkable. I want to thank all of you today for your participation, and I think for a productive and successful AGM. And thank you for your ongoing engagement in NDRIO, and that certainly became very, very clear in a number of the questions that you asked. This isn't for people who are just kind of notionally looking at materials. You're obviously very committed and really want this to succeed. And I thank you for that because it's very important to us. If you would have any follow-up questions, though, or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to NDRIO, and we will certainly commit to getting back to you on that. So with that, I will close off the meeting and Wish you all the best and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, night, wherever you may be situated at the present time. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.